Next morning, in a private encounter, Samuel poured oil on Saul's head, anointing him as king. "The Lord has chosen you," Samuel declared, sealing Saul's future with a kiss on his brow. Saul's heart was transformed that day, and he was filled with the Spirit of God, set on a path he could never have imagined. Though Saul was now king, he returned home quietly, as if nothing had changed. But soon, a crisis would test his new authority. The Ammonites, led by the ruthless Nahash, besieged Jabesh-Gilead, threatening to enslave its people. Desperate, the city sent messengers to Saul, pleading for help. The Spirit of God stirred within him, and Saul sprang into action. Saul rallied the Israelites with a call to arms, summoning a great army. Filled with divine strength, he led them to victory over the Ammonites, rescuing Jabesh-Gilead. The triumph cemented Saul's legitimacy as king in the eyes of the people. They gathered at Gilgal, offering sacrifices to God and officially crowning Saul as their king. For a time, Saul's reign was marked by success. With his son Jonathan by his side, Saul raised a powerful army and defeated Israel's enemies, trusting in Samuel's prayers and sacrifices to guide them to victory. But as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Saul's faith. Pride crept into his heart, and his obedience to God started to falter. The first major sign of trouble came when Saul prepared for battle against the Philistines. His army was anxious, and fear spread as the enemy's forces grew. Samuel had instructed Saul to wait 7 days for him to arrive and offer a burnt sacrifice. But as the soldiers began to abandon him, Saul grew desperate. In a moment of panic, he performed the sacrifice himself, an act that defied God's clear instructions. Just as the last embers of the sacrifice burned, Samuel arrived. His face darkened with disappointment. "What have you done?" Samuel demanded. Saul tried to explain, saying, "I saw my men leaving, and you hadn't arrived. I had no choice." Samuel shook his head. "You have acted foolishly. You have not kept the Lord's command. If you had obeyed, God would have established your kingdom forever. But now, your reign will not endure. The Lord has chosen another, a man after his own heart." From that moment, Saul's reign was marked by instability. Though he remained king, the favor of God began to slip from his grasp. Saul's last chance to redeem himself came with a command from God to destroy the Amalekites, a wicked people who had once attacked Israel without cause. Saul was to leave nothing alive, not even the livestock. The mission started well. Saul's army crushed the Amalekites. But when the dust settled, Saul made a fatal mistake. Instead of destroying everything, he spared the Amalekite king, Agag, and kept the best livestock, claiming they would be used for sacrifices. When Samuel confronted him, Saul quickly shifted the blame onto his soldiers. But Samuel saw through the excuse. "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obedience?" Samuel asked. "To obey is better than sacrifice, and rebellion is as sinful as witchcraft." Then came the final blow. "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." In a grim act of justice, Samuel executed Agag himself. From that day forward, Samuel never saw Saul again. Though Saul remained king in title, God's spirit had departed from him. His reign spiraled into paranoia, fear, and chaos. Once favored by God, King Saul now found himself a man adrift, consumed by fear, anxiety, and paranoia. The presence of God had left him, and in its absence, a darkness settled over his heart. His sleepless nights were filled with dread, his days haunted by restless thoughts. Concerned for their troubled king, Saul's servants suggested that music might soothe his mind, but Saul knew no musicians. One of his attendants, however, remembered a young shepherd boy named David, known not just for his skill with the harp, but for the presence of the Lord that seemed to accompany him. And so, David was summoned to the palace. From the first strum of his harp, a strange peace washed over Saul. The boy's music eased the king's troubled soul, giving him rare moments of tranquility. This was the first encounter between Saul and David, the young man who would one day replace him as king. Saul's reign was threatened not only by inner demons, but by external foes, especially the relentless Philistines. Among their ranks stood a towering warrior named Goliath, who mocked Israel's army day after day, daring anyone to fight him. Fear paralyzed Saul's soldiers. No one dared face the giant. One day, David came to the battlefield, bringing supplies for his brothers. Seeing Goliath's taunts, the shepherd boy approached Saul with a bold request. "Let me fight the giant." Saul looked at the boy in disbelief. "You are just a boy. Goliath has fought in wars his whole life." But David was resolute. "The Lord who saved me from lions and bears will deliver me from this Philistine." Reluctantly, Saul agreed, offering David his armor. But the armor was too heavy, so David faced Goliath armed with only a sling and a few smooth stones. With a single stone, David struck Goliath in the forehead, felling the giant. Israel's army roared in victory, chasing the Philistines from the battlefield. Saul was stunned and grateful. From that day, David became a trusted commander, fighting alongside Jonathan, Saul's son, and leading the armies of Israel to victory after victory. David's victories brought him fame, and the people adored him. They sang songs in the streets. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. What began as admiration for David slowly twisted into jealousy within Saul's heart. As David's influence grew, Saul's envy deepened, turning into obsession. At first, Saul tried to contain his resentment, but it consumed him. He threw spears at David in fits of rage and paranoia, but David always escaped. Even Jonathan and Michal, Saul's daughter and David's wife, could not shield David from Saul's wrath. David fled the palace, becoming a fugitive hunted by the man he once served. Twice, David had the chance to kill Saul. Once in a cave, and another time as Saul slept in his camp. David stood over the sleeping king. Yet both times, he spared Saul's life, refusing to harm the man anointed by God. "The Lord forbid that I harm his anointed," David said. But Saul's madness knew no bounds, and his pursuit of David only intensified. With the prophet Samuel now dead, Saul found himself truly alone. His enemies closed in. Most dangerously, the Philistines once again prepared for war. Saul sought guidance from God, but the heavens were silent. No dreams came to him, no prophet offered advice. Panic gripped Saul's heart. In his desperation, Saul did the unthinkable. Though he had outlawed witchcraft in Israel, Saul disguised himself and travelled under cover of night to consult a medium in Endor. Fearful of punishment, the woman initially refused to help him. But Saul swore no harm would come to her and begged her to summon Samuel's spirit. When Samuel's spirit appeared, the woman cried out in terror. "You are Saul," she exclaimed, realizing she had been deceived. Samuel's ghost spoke. "Why have you disturbed me?" Broken and desperate, Saul confessed his fear. "The Philistines are at war with me, and God no longer answers me. I need to know what will happen." Samuel's words were like a dagger. "The Lord has departed from you because of your disobedience. He has given the kingdom to David. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. Israel will fall to the Philistines." Saul collapsed to the ground, paralyzed with fear. Knowing his fate was sealed, he returned to camp, consumed by dread. The next morning, the Philistines attacked with overwhelming force. The Israelite army was shattered, and Saul's worst fears came true. His 3 sons, including Jonathan, fell in battle. Arrows from Philistine archers struck Saul, wounding him grievously. Knowing the end was near, Saul begged his armor-bearer to end his life. "Don't let these uncircumcised men kill me and make sport of me," he pleaded. But the armor-bearer was too afraid. With no other choice, Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. When his armor-bearer saw that the king was dead, he did the same. Saul, his sons and his men all perished that day. The Israelites fled their cities, leaving them to be plundered by the Philistines. The next day, the Philistines found Saul's body on the battlefield. They cut off his head and stripped him of his armor, sending word throughout their lands to celebrate the fall of Israel's king. They placed Saul's armor in the temple of their gods and fastened his body to the walls of Beth-shan as a grim trophy. But not everyone forgot Saul's bravery. When the people of Jabesh-Gilead, the city Saul had once saved from the Ammonites, heard of his fate, their bravest men travelled through the night to recover the bodies of Saul and his sons. They brought them back to Jabesh, burned their remains, and buried the bones beneath a tamarisk tree. For 7 days, they fasted in mourning for the fallen king. In the end, Saul was not rejected because he lacked ability or courage, but because he failed to trust and obey God. His story serves as a haunting reminder that even those chosen for greatness can fall, not by external enemies, but by the choices they make within. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments below, and if there is any other Bible story you are interested in knowing about. Also, if you enjoyed this content, then please hit that like and subscribe button, and enable that bell notification so you can always be sure to follow me for many more life stories from the Bible. See you in the next amazing story. Thanks for watching.